Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've got a really interesting head-to-head comparison. We've got two shells that are technically the same, but they're a little bit different, and we're going to be running them through two different shotguns as well, because we've got a 12 gauge versus 20 gauge head-to-head comparison, and I think this is going to be really interesting. I'm really curious to see how both of these combos can actually perform, because I think we may be able to get some decently impressive results for each one of these, respective to their actual gauge and its typical performance anyway, but I'm curious to see how similar or dissimilar the patterns are as well, side by side between 12 and 20. One of you guys have requested to see some of these shells through one of these chokes we've got today here recently, and it gave me the idea of why don't we run these two as a comparison, so this should be rather interesting. But for the shells we're running today, I brought out some more of the Herter's Strutter lead shells, but as you can see, we've got 12 gauge and 20 gauge. Both of these are a 3-inch lead number 5. With the 12 gauge, we have a 1 7/8 ounce payload of 5s at 1210. With the 20 gauge, we have a 1 1/4 ounce payload of 5s at 1185. So obviously, two different gauges, two different payload weights, two different velocities, but these are essentially the same load, just two different gauges. If you don't know, Herter's is the in-house brand name for Cabela's and Bass Pro, but these are all made by Winchester. So these are both essentially a Winchester Super X shell, just in a different box. We know how those can typically perform. These should do the same, but we've got 12 and 20. I think the 20 gauge, with it being a lead 5, is going to be a lot more limited than the 12 gauge is at 40 yards. But two of the same shells, two different gauges, we'll see just how different they actually perform. As for the shotguns we're running today, for our 12 gauge, I brought out the Mossberg 500. Very typical stuff here, 28-inch barrel on it. Nothing fancy as far as the Mossberg 500 is concerned. We know this is a good pattern in combination. And for our 20 gauge contender, we've got the Stevens 301 with a vector red dot on top with a 26-inch barrel. Now, not exactly a direct comparison as far as guns go. However, both of these use the same choke thread system, that being the standard Invector or the wind choke system, which means we can run essentially two identical chokes through both of these shotguns. And that's exactly what we're doing today. I've got two identical chokes, just different gauges. These being the Carlson's Longbeard XR turkey chokes. The 20 gauge is a 568. The 12 gauge is a 660. We know both of these are good performers, but we'll see how they do put head to head here. So we've got the same shells, the same chokes, the same choke threads as well. You can see that these are identical in length, same exact thread overall. So this should be a really interesting comparison. So for our test today, we're running everything the same as usual. We've got two targets set up at 40 yards side by side. So we'll start with 12 gauge, then we'll move to 20 gauge, put both of them through the chronograph and see what we can actually get. I'm really curious to see the difference between them. I think there's going to be a pretty big gap in performance for sure, especially at 40 yards with lead in the 20 gauge. But let's take some shots and see what we can actually get. All right, we'll take a quick look at our velocities before we look at our patterns. For our 12 gauge, our boss claim is 1210, but it gave us 1297, so a little bit above their claim. I think both of them were, but usually mid to upper 1200s is about typical for a Winchester Super X load, which is what these are, just in a different box. And for our 20 gauge, boss claim was 1185, and we're at 1273. So still a little bit above that boss claim, but a little bit slower than our 12 gauge. Both of them are perfectly fine velocities. Let's go check out our patterns and see just how different they might be. All right, so here we have our two 40-yard targets side by side. We have our 12 gauge on the left and our 20 gauge on the right, and we actually see two pretty decent patterns here, especially for that 20 gauge. I'm honestly a little bit impressed with that one in particular. It may not be anything over the top special, but for a lead load and 20 gauge, that's a pretty solid pattern over there on the right. Either way though, both of these are pretty similar. The size of them are pretty close. The 12 gauge one on the left definitely has more pellets in it, which is no surprise whatsoever. We already knew that coming into it with the payload difference here, but they're decently similar as far as the overall size and spread goes. First up here, we'll start with our 12 gauge pattern. We definitely have a dead bird at 40 yards. There's one through the eyeball and a couple more through the top of the head and neck there. Our pattern might have favored just a tiny bit high there, but you can see it definitely tried to condense itself down, but it is a little bit on the blotchy side as well. We definitely tried to have a condensed area of shot, but within there are a few little hotter zones with a few little thinner zones mixed in as well. Outside of that, we do string a couple pellets off here and there around the edges. Nothing out of the normal or nothing that I'm surprised to see here. Overall, that is a pretty typical Winchester Super X type of pattern, but that 660 might be just a touch too tight on the choke constriction, maybe. I think we have seen a touch better, or at least a little more even throughout the main core of the pattern than what we see here, but still, for a basic lead load, that's going to do the job out to 40 yards to that combo just fine. So pretty much what I expected to see here. But here we have our 20 gauge pattern, and it honestly isn't bad. Lead in a 20 gauge at 40 yards is extremely limited at the best of times. Is this Longbeard XR capable? No, those shells will pattern better. But when compared to all the other more basic lead shells on the shelf, the Remington Nitro Turkeys, the Federal Grand Slams, and so on, that's probably one of the better performers, and that even outshoots the Winchester XX shells, from my experience as well. We absolutely have a dead bird, although we did favor a touch to the left here. That's not the shell or choke my red dot is zeroed with, and we have a breeze from right to left today as well. But he is still dead. There's one through the brain and several more down the spine, and if we had that centered up, he would have a number more pellets through the head and neck. So yes, that is a little more broad pattern. It may not have a dedicated core area, but the size and spread of the pattern is pretty similar to what we saw with the 12 gauge, just with less pellets. So for what this shell is in a 20 gauge, that's a decently solid pattern. I mean, you can see a pretty circular spread. It tried to condense itself down. It's a pretty even spread as well. There are a few around the edges, but nothing major there. Probably less strings and stuff around the edge than what we saw with the 12 gauge even. So that's perfectly fine, all things considered. So overall, two perfectly solid performances for what these shells are. Pretty basic budget-oriented lead load. But let's pull both of these turkey targets down. I'll finish circling and counting some pellets, and we will really see the exact number difference between what we have here with these two. Okay, so now we've got our targets down and out of the way, and we can see the real difference between these patterns, and they're really not too far away from each other, or at least maybe not nearly as far away as what a lot of us probably thought they would be. Both of them are decent patterns for what they are, and yet again, that 20 gauge one over there on the right looks pretty decent for what it is, all things considered. So numbers wise, they're actually relatively close, or at least pretty equivalent to one another based on how many more pellets are just in the entire 12 gauge shell versus the 20 gauge payload. But first, we'll start over here on the left with our 12 gauge pattern. Inside of our 10-inch core there, we have 77 total pellets. Decent spread, but that bottom right edge is definitely a little bit thin. That's one of the splotchy areas that I was noticing earlier. And outside of that, with our 20-inch leeway ring, most of it is pretty even with an additional 128 pellets in there, but that right side over there might be a little bit thin as well. That might be another little thinner void area that I was seeing earlier. Overall though, pretty basic budget oriented shell, pretty typical performance, would absolutely do the job just fine out to 40 yards. Definitely not Longbeard XR capable, but that would certainly work. And we can definitely see we have a bunch of stuff outside around the edges scattered as well. I don't know that we have as many of them, or if they're scattered as far out as what we see here with the 20 gauge one. So that's pretty interesting to see as well. But for our 12 gauge baseline, it's a pretty decent average starting point. But here we have our 20 gauge pattern now. Same 10 and 20 inch circles drawn as well. Inside of our 10 inch core, we have 57 pellets compared to 77 with the 12 gauge. So we lost 20 pellets, but that is a pretty even core area there as well. Again, not Longbeard XR capable, but for a lead 5 in a 20 gauge shell, that's a pretty solid looking area of shot right there. It would certainly do the job out to 40 yards. Pretty even spread. I'm liking what I'm seeing. Outside of that, with our 20-inch leeway ring, we pick up an additional 83 pellets within there compared to 128 with our 12 gauge. So definitely less pellets. That's where our pellet count really starts to show up, is outside of our core for sure. We have less pellets overall, which is edges, no surprise. And around the edges, we do still have a few little flyers around there, but they're not major strings out everywhere. The stuff we see outside is either a few definite flyers or it's all pretty condensed up close to that 20-inch ring there. So I gotta say, that might not be the best lead 20 gauge pattern we've ever gotten. The Longbeard still own that crown. However, that's probably the best 20 gauge pattern from any non-Longbeard XR shell that we've seen. That's a perfectly viable option for sure. And numbers wise, it's not terribly far behind what we saw with the 12 gauge. It's simply just less pellets in the entire payload. But again, looking at these two side by side, the overall size of the pattern and the characteristics are pretty close. Numbers wise, they're not too far off. Both of them are perfectly solid, so overall, you can't complain too much about either one. Maybe with the 12 gauge one over there on the left, we can refine the choke a little bit, but I wanted to keep it as equal as I could, those being both the Carlson's Longbeard XR chokes, and they both did perfectly fine, all things considered, although the 12 gauge one is a touch splotchy in some areas, where I don't think we really see that with the 20 gauge one. So very interesting test. I would definitely hunt with both of these if it's what I had, and I definitely don't say that very often with a lot of 20 gauge lead shells. So nice to see the difference here, or maybe not quite as big of a difference as what we might have initially thought. And here we have our two wads. Immediately you can tell, yep, this is just standard Winchester equipment. Like I've already said, these are just a reboxed Winchester Super X shell essentially. On the left we have our 12 gauge, on the right we have our 20 gauge. The 20 gauge is a little bit stiffer, a little bit different coloration, more white compared to gray, but overall very similar, nothing out of the ordinary. Both of these look very typical, so nothing I'm concerned with here. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about these results right here? That was definitely a pretty interesting comparison, and they're really not that far off from each other. Typically, lead in a 20 gauge is very limited out to 40 yards, unless you're running a Longbeard XR shell, so I am pleasantly surprised with how that performed for sure. 12 gauge one did about what I expected it to. Maybe you could have went with a little less choke constriction and evened it out just a little bit. Maybe that's where some of our splotchiness came from over here, but ultimately it did probably pretty close to what I thought it would. Neither one of these absolutely lit the board up, necessarily speaking, but both of them would absolutely be capable out to 40 yards for a turkey hunt any day of the week. I wouldn't hesitate to run either combo. Maybe we can refine our chokes a little bit with these to just dial in the pattern a touch more, but either one of these you could take out and absolutely get the job done with. So overall, I figured we would see a little bit bigger spread between these two as far as difference goes. But that's why you test things and see what you can get. Test different shells, test different chokes, test different guns, see what combos you can find that you like the performance of. Because sometimes, even like this 20 gauge one over here, they can surprise you a little bit. But leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Herter Strutter lead loads? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? Are either one of these a combo you would hunt with? And if so, which one do you prefer? Since they are a lead load, are you going to stick with 12 gauge, or is that 20 gauge pattern enticing enough for you to run it? And maybe what other choke combos do you want to see us run these two loads through that you think might be a good performer? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, you have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All the information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.